It's our pleasure to welcome our speakers. First, we'd like to welcome Dr. Jennifer Maguire to open with applicable manufacturing standards. Dr. Maguire is the director in the Office of Quality Surveillance, Office of Pharmaceutical Quality, CDER FDA. Next, Simone Pitts will help us understand CGMP inspections and 483s. Simone Pitts is a pharmaceutical national expert at the Office of Regulatory Affairs and FDA. Then Dr. Francis Godwin will discuss FDA regulatory actions and how FDA reviews inspectional findings. Dr. Godwin is the director in the Office of Manufacturing Quality, Office of Compliance, CDER FDA. Follow Dr. Godwin, Darshini Satchi will show us where to find inspection and other compliance documents. Darshini Satchi is the Deputy Director in the Division of Information Disclosure Policy, Office of Regulatory Programs in CDER. And finally, Rob Bughman will provide an FDA inspections dashboard demo. Rob Bughman is a project manager in the FDA inspection dashboard team in the ORA. Now, please join us to welcome our first presenter, Dr. Maguire.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Jennifer Maguire, and I'm the Director of the Office of Quality Surveillance within CDER's Office of Pharmaceutical Quality, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Understanding FDA Inspections and Data. Today, we'd like to provide an overview of drug manufacturing inspections. This slide shows an overview of today's topics. I'll start by discussing manufacturing standards and showing some data related to our inventory of sites and inspections. I'll then pass the ball to my colleagues who will talk about understanding CGMP inspections and Form FDA 483s. They'll talk about how FDA reviews inspectional findings and how that may lead to FDA regulatory actions. And they'll show you where you can find inspection and other compliance documents. Based on the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, all drugs must be manufactured under Current Good Manufacturing Practice, or CGMP. This applies to both prescription and non-prescription drugs. So for example, drugs that are approved in an application, over-the-counter monograph drugs, and some compounded drugs. CGMP standards are further specified based on drug type. So for example, there are standards for finished pharmaceuticals that can be found in 21 CFR 210 and 211, and standards for positron emission tomography drugs can be found at 21 CFR 212. The guidance for active pharmaceutical ingredient manufacturer can be found in ICH Q7. For application products, inspections of manufacturing facilities may be conducted prior to approval. This is done to assess CGMP compliance, the applicant's ability to meet application commitments, and also to assure data integrity. Facilities that manufacture products for the U.S. market are required to register with FDA and list their products. After a facility starts manufacturing, they are subject to routine CGMP surveillance inspections prioritized based on our risk-based site selection model, which I'll talk more about in a moment. If warranted by information available to the agency, facilities may be subject to a for-cause inspection. Examples of information that may lead to a for-cause inspection includes information from a confidential informant or something like a sudden rise in consumer complaints that come into the agency about a particular product. The site selection model is a multi-criteria decision analysis model that prioritizes manufacturing sites for routine surveillance inspections. The model was originally developed for fiscal year 2005, but it's since been updated several times to meet the statutory requirements that are outlined in FDASIA. Note that in 2012, Section 510H of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act was amended to replace the fixed minimum inspection interval for inspections with the risk-based schedule. All sites, regardless of their location, are prioritized by the same model. Each year, the risk factors and the data that are used in the model are reviewed as part of our rigorous governance process. More information about the site selection model can be found in a publicly available map. The site selection model ranks each site that is engaged in the commercial manufacture of drugs by a site score. The top scoring sites are prioritized for inspection, and an assignment is made to the field in line with their available resources to conduct surveillance. The risk factors that are used in the model are shown on this slide. The model considers things like the compliance history of a site and the time since its last inspection, hazard signals such as post-market reports and recalls, the type of site and the complexity of the products it manufactures, and finally, patient exposure. I now want to talk briefly about inspections under mutual recognition agreements, or MRA. In 2007, the U.S. entered into an MRA with the European Union, and by mid-2019, all EU member states were assessed and found capable for CGMP inspections. Since 2008, FDA has been classifying inspection reports from our MRA partners for sites that are assigned for inspection. In 2021, we entered into an MRA with the UK following their exit from the EU. Also in 2021, a third-party inspection assessment was done to expand the MRA scope beyond the US and the EU. So this means that FDA can now classify inspections that are conducted by our MRA partners in third countries. For example, an inspection that's conducted by an EU member state of a facility that is outside of the European Union. And finally, in July of this year, the MRA with Swissmedic was implemented. This slide shows the global distribution of API manufacturers supplying the US market. The pie chart on the left shows the location of generic API manufacturers only. You can see that both Europe and India contribute significantly to the generic market, followed by the United States and China. The pie chart on the right shows the location of all API manufacturers. In this pie chart, the US manufacturing of API is greater due to the API manufactured domestically for both biological and over-the-counter drugs. Here again are pie charts, but this time showing the global distribution of finished dosage form manufacturers that are supplying the US market. The pie chart on the left shows the location, again, of generic drug manufacturers only, and the pie chart on the right shows the location of all finished dosage form manufacturers. The charts are actually not drastically different. Most generic finished dosage form manufacturers are in the United States, although India and Europe contribute significantly to the market. Indian sites are more focused on generic drug manufacturing. This slide shows all drug quality assurance inspection counts for fiscal year 2000 to 2022. So this includes both for-cause inspections and surveillance inspections. You can see that the amount of foreign inspections has increased as the pharmaceutical industry has globalized. For several years now, the FDA has been conducting as many foreign inspections as domestic inspections. The dip in the last 3 years is due to the COVID public health emergency and travel restrictions. Here I'm showing counts of surveillance inspections conducted in the different regions of the world from fiscal year 2018 to 2022. This data set only shows inspections assigned through the site selection model that I discussed earlier for routine surveillance. So for-cause inspections are excluded from this data set. Again, you can see near parity in foreign and domestic inspection counts, at least up until the pandemic. The agency is now able to inspect globally again without travel restrictions, so we're working hard to cover our inventory of sites. My final slide shows the number of MRA inspections classified from fiscal year 2018 through fiscal year 2022. The MRAs, and particularly classification of inspections performed in third countries, was a critical tool during the pandemic. MRAs yield greater efficiencies for both the U.S. and foreign regulatory systems by avoiding duplication of inspections. It also enables allocation of resources towards the inspection of drug manufacturing facilities with potentially higher public health risks across the globe. I'd now like to toss the ball to my colleague Simone.
Thank you, Jennifer, for the introduction. Good day. My name is Simone Pitts, and I'm a national expert within ORA, which is Office of Regulatory Affairs for FDA. I would like to speak to you about understanding CGMP inspections and FDA 483s. Why an inspection is important? An inspection is important because it verifies the firm's adherence to good manufacturing practice standards. Pretty much the procedures, policies, guidances that are out there that are applicable to manufacturing operations, and to ensure that a firm consistently produces a quality product that meets its predetermined specifications. And how do we achieve this? We achieve this by using a risk-based approach on these inspections that pretty much focus on the two most important areas that we are concerned with, and that is drug quality and if there's any risk to patients. So we are always going to be looking at, for the mindset for these inspections, if there's any impact to product and if there's any impact to patients. Typically, about 90 to 95% of the drug inspections that are performed are mostly found to be within compliance. It's the other 5 to about 10% that are found to be violative, and those will require additional, perhaps an OAI classification or a regulatory meeting and or a warning letter with the respective compliance division. What is an inspection? An inspection is based on the compliance program that we utilize. For drug manufacturing inspections, routine surveillance inspections, we utilize compliance program 7356002. And within that compliance program, you can see that there are the 6 systems that we utilize and we try and cover during the inspection. And the 6 systems are quality, the facilities and equipment, materials, production, packaging and labeling, and the laboratory control system. There is a link that's provided to you as part of this presentation that gives you access where you can search and take a look at for yourself the compliance programs that we utilize. You will find the compliance program 56002, and you will also find the other ones for, say, for example, pre-approval inspections. You will see the one for sterile inspections and also API inspections. During the inspection, the quality system is always assessed to ensure that there is overall compliance, and normally there's about 2 additional systems that are covered on a rotational basis. So for example, quality is always covered, and the investigator may choose to cover the production and facilities and equipment system. But for the next inspection, the quality system will always be covered, and the investigator can choose to cover 2 other systems, say for example, materials and or packaging and labeling system. What is an inspection? A little bit more. It's a coverage. Coverage of this system is documented in an EIR. You may have heard it referred to as an establishment inspection report. And that establishment inspection report, EIR, details what the investigator covered during the inspection. And that's going to detail if they've covered validation, laboratory control system, if they looked at analytical data, any and everything that investigator covered to determine if the firm is operating in a state of control, and that is listed in the EIR or the Establishment Inspection Report for the full name. Items that routinely are covered during the inspection include deviation reports, non-conformance reports, equipment qualification, supplier qualification, process validation, the testing of incoming raw materials, if the analytical methods are validated, if there's a stability profile, all of those types of things and more are covered during the inspection, and you can find additional things that are covered when you look at the compliance program. Any deficiencies that are noted and that are in violation of CGMP requirements, they are to be listed on the FDA 483, and that will be issued at the conclusion of the inspection. What a 483 is and is not. This is a very important topic for us to go over. The FDA Form 83 is provided to the company's management at the close of the inspection. There should be no surprises. Normally, the investigator has daily wrap-ups at the end of the day with the firm to discuss if they have anything that has risen to the level of an FDA 43 and will be listed as an observation. So when it comes to the closeout meeting, the CSO issues that FDA 483 to top management, and you can see the paragraph here. It is taken directly from our Investigation Operations Manual, specifically Chapter 5, and this gives you a little bit of insight as to what the 483 is. Just note that this is just a snapshot in time. It's not an all-inclusive list, because primarily the investigator has anywhere from possibly 3 to 7 days to conduct their inspection. So they're only looking at a snapshot of time in order to make their judgment and be able to issue an FDA 43 if applicable. If no observations are listed, then an FDA 483 will not be listed. Just one thing to note, that the same principles apply whether it is a foreign or whether it is a domestic inspection. The one important difference to note between a foreign and a domestic inspection is that the credentialing that goes into an investigator to perform independent foreign inspections, and those credentialing requirements are a little bit more stringent than the requirements for an investigator performing independent domestic inspections. For foreign inspections, the biggest thing is time. The investigator has a little bit of a less time to complete the inspections, where those type of inspections on a foreign are usually anywhere from about 3, 4, 5, or 6 days, whereas on a domestic inspection, a home inspection, the investigator could have a little bit more time to go over, evaluate, and assess things that they are observing during the inspection. Also, you will find a link to this operation manual, our investigations operation manual. It's a link, and it gives you the entire IOM, so you can feel free to review and pretty much follow along with what the investigator is going to do during their inspection. At the conclusion of the inspection, and if an FDA 43 is listed, it only includes factual observations from the current inspection. It doesn't look at anything from a previous inspection. It's only from the current inspection, and there are no opinions and no assumptions are supposed to be written on the 483. It's only factual events that can be supported by the documentation that the investigator has collected. The investigator applies the applicable law, the Food and Drug Cosmetic Act, and the related acts depending on what they are finding during the inspection. Typically, observations that are listed on a 483 are in order of significance and listed by the system. For example, 21 CFR .22, it references the quality system. And this one specifically says, for example, there is a lack of the quality control unit. So the observation written by the investigator can read something similar to, specifically, your firm lacked a quality control unit that has a responsibility to oversee manufacturing operations. Just to give you an example as to how these observations will be written and listed on the 483. The Code of Federal Regulations, the CFR, Title 21, Part 210 and 211 are the minimum standards that are applicable and acceptable for finished drug products. At the conclusion of an inspection, and if an FDA Form 43 is issued, companies are strongly encouraged to respond within the time frame, that 15-day business day time frame, with their corrective and preventative action plan. And the expectation is that if you are going to submit your response to the 43 with your corrective and action plan, that it be implemented in a timely manner. The expectation is that if you cannot do something right away, we don't want you to commit to doing it. Put a timeline in place with an expected completion date, and that would be acceptable. What we have for you right here is an example of what a 483 looks like when it's issued. You have at the top of the page on the left side, you have the district, the division where the firm is located. The redacted portions, of course, are the proprietary information for the firm, the dates of the inspection, and what the company manufactures. And then you will see observation, what it is, and the examples that the investigator has underneath to support the observation that they have written. What an FDA Form 83 is not. It's discussed with the company at the close of the inspection to assure that there is a complete and full understanding of the observations that is listed by the investigator. And it also gives the opportunity for a meaningful corrective action that can be developed and initiated. Because at the close of the inspection, the investigator will ask, is there any comments? Is there anything that you would like to add? And firms can say, we'll respond in writing, or this is what we tentatively will respond with. The 483 is not an all-inclusive list. It's just a snapshot in time and for what the investigator has been seeing at the time. It should be discussed with management, and it does not include every single violation. It's only a representative of what the investigator has revealed and has looked at that time. This is not the agency's final communication, but it's just an opportunity to have a dialogue between FDA and the firm. This is the investigator's recommendation. The recommendation needs to be finalized through the compliance division, and then that is where the final classification of a firm will come from. At the conclusion of the inspection and at the wrap-up, it's the EIR, the FDA 43, and the evidence that the investigator collected. And the evidence that the investigator collected includes the documents. What documents they collected during the inspection to support the 483 observation. All of that is collected, an EIR is written, and all of that is provided to the compliance division in order for an assessment to be made about the classification of the firm. And to give you a little bit more about how an FDA reviews their inspectional findings, the next presenter is Francis Godwin from the Office of Manufacturing Quality. So thank you for allowing me to spend this time with you, and have a good day.
Thank you, Simone. Now I'm going to talk about how FDA reviews inspectional findings. My name is Francis Godwin. I'm the Director of the Office of Manufacturing Quality in CDER's Office of Compliance. So How does FDA review findings from inspection? Well, when a 483 is issued, a firm has 15 business days to respond with their corrective actions and further information for FDA's review. I've included a link here. This is the Federal Register notice, which goes into much more detail about responding to a 483 and some agency policy around that. Now, what does FDA do? Well, the first thing that we do when there's an inspection with a 483 is we are going to review the findings and evidence collected on the inspection. We're also going to review the content and any exhibits or attachments with the firm's response. And what we do is we benchmark these pieces of information against relevant technical and legal standards of the FD&C Act, et cetera. And we're looking at all of this through the lens of patient risk and regulatory significance. There are different risk categories for a sterile drug, a non-sterile drug. There are different technical and legal standards for a solid oral dosage versus a sterile injectable, and we factor that into our evaluation. And depending on our review, we may concur or downgrade or upgrade the final CGMP classification. So what do I mean by classification? Well, this ties into something as part of the Generic Drug User Fee Act and the commitments FDA made to industry, where when a GMP inspection occurs, FDA is committed to telling the inspected facility what their CGMP classification is within 90 days of the end of an inspection. Our classifications are also posted to the web. There's going to be some more on that. And the goal was to increase communication with industry and to the public. Now, when you're looking at CGMP classifications, there are three outcomes. The first is no action indicated, also known as NAI. There's voluntary action indicated, aka VAI. And then the third one is OAI, or official action indicated. Now, when you're looking at different classifications, there's different ramifications for each one. When you're looking at no action indicated and voluntary action indicated, or NAI, VAI, for these classifications, the facility that was inspected is considered to be in an acceptable state of compliance with regards to CGMP. The only real difference between an NAI and a VAI is whether a 483 was issued, where an NAI inspection means that no 483 was issued, and a VAI means that a 483 was. Either way, we consider them to be an acceptable state of compliance. A VAI also means that FDA has reviewed the firm's 483 response as part of our classification. And when a firm is classified as NAI or VAI, it does not generally affect the approvability of any pending applications that are under review, and it shouldn't impact any government procurement or contracts with the facility. Now, on the opposite side of the coin, if a facility is classified as official action indicated or OAI, they are not considered to be in an acceptable state of compliance with CGMP, and they may be subject to further regulatory or enforcement action, which I'm going to get into a little bit. Now, interestingly enough, a firm can be in OAI status regardless of whether a 483 has been issued. It's rare, but there are certain inspections where no 483 was issued, but we've classified the facility as OAI based on the findings. And when a facility is OAI, this typically will have a negative impact on approvability of pending applications before the agency. And an OAI status may also impact government procurements and contracts with that facility. So in terms of compliance and the timeline after an inspection, kind of laid it out start to finish, and it kind of repeats on itself a bit. So you start with the inspection where the investigators go into the facility and look and see how things are operating. And then the second part is 90 days from the inspection, where we try and classify the inspection based on the firm's response and the inspectional findings. And we do that within 90 days with a letter that's sent to the firm and posted to the website. After that, if we have classified a facility as OAI, the agency's goal is to take regulatory action within 6 months of the inspection, whether it be a warning letter or some other tools. Now, after we've taken a regulatory action, the process doesn't end. We'll review the response to the warning letter or other action, and then once we believe that the facility is in a suitable state, we will conduct a follow-up inspection if needed. And then we will classify that follow-up inspection, and if the firm has corrected the original issues and we verified them on site, we may close out the matter, or if we go out on a re-inspection and see that they haven't corrected it, we may further escalate using some other tools. And speaking of this, I'm going to talk about what some of those tools are as I kind of summarize some of the regulatory actions available to the agency. Before I do that, I want to talk about inspectional outcomes by region. So the graph that you see here is from testimony from one of our associate commissioners back in 2020, talking about the compliance rate of drug manufacturers in various regions. And you can see, over 90% of the facilities in our inventory are considered compliant with GMP, though there is some variation region to region. Since this was in 2020, we thought that we would provide an updated count. And here is the most recent status. And so this gives you the percentage of drug manufacturing facilities with an acceptable or NAI/VAI outcome by region as of May 2023. Now you'll notice that there's some shifting. One of these things is related to hand sanitizers. So during the COVID pandemic, there was a dramatic increase in demand and therefore a dramatic increase in the number of manufacturers producing hand sanitizer. And so you see this kind of shift in the U.S. Compliance rate, and this is primarily based on new entrants into the hand sanitizer market that had various issues that we had to address via inspection. So there was a slightly higher OAI rate at the time. You don't really see this in the foreign arena because we were using alternate tools to inspection to regulate and placing firms on import alert without inspections, et cetera. So there is some shifting in the data, but part of that is basically an effect of the hand sanitizer effect on the drug inventory. And things are heading back to kind of, pre-COVID inventory levels when it comes to drug manufacturers in the FDA inventory. Now, before I was talking about taking various regulatory actions, when we have compliance issues, we have a lot of different options and a lot of tools in our toolbox. Some of the most powerful tools are the three listed above. These would be consent decrees or injunctions, seizing of drugs or administrative detention. These are when situations warrant it where we will actually work with our colleagues in the Department of Justice and the judicial system to seize drugs or put a firm under consent decree. The middle row is kind of more your classic and more commonly used tools. An import alert is where if we have evidence that a foreign facility is not meeting GMP, we can place them on import alert where drugs from that facility would not be allowed to legally enter the United States. We coordinate with our colleagues at Customs and Border Patrol on that. One of our primary tools, though, is our warning letters. And warning letters are advisory actions where we will detail the CGMP deficiencies that were observed through inspection or other means and ask the firm for corrective actions. These are also posted to the website, et cetera. Additionally, sometimes we will meet with firms to go through technical topics. Those are our regulatory meetings. And on the bottom row, we have a few others. We have untitled letters, response letters. These are used less often. And I do want to point out, while most of the tools I'm talking about are for OAI inspections, some of these can be used for NAI, VAI outcomes, particularly if we want to meet with a firm and talk with them on a few technical issues to get them over the hump. And speaking of some of these things, I'd like to talk about perceptions of FDA action. So much as with 483s, FDA often sees misperception regarding posted warning letter content. And this comes from on two fronts. First comes from a technical applicability, and secondly, what is needed to issue a warning letter in the first place. So first, let me address the technical applicability. So when compliance does our review, we're looking at legal standards, but we're also looking at a lot of technical standards, whether they be industry guidance or things that we find in the regulations, et cetera. But there's also a lot of scientific terms or industry terms, depending. I think probably the most illustrative example of this is water systems that are used for pharmaceutical water production. They're not supposed to have something in them called a dead leg. And a dead leg is basically where the design of the piping would allow for stagnant water to sit if the system was turned off. Okay, so think about kind of the plumbing under your sink and the U-bend, stuff like that. So we use the term dead leg. It's kind of the engineering term that's used for water systems. We had a warning letter we issued that said, your water system's deficient, dead legs were observed. When the warning letter was posted, we got a big kerfluffle because people were assuming we were talking about body parts. No, we were actually talking about an engineering term, et cetera. So we do see some misinterpretations and misperceptions from a technical applicability standpoint. But the one that's more common is, what is needed to issue a warning letter in the first place, at least for the drug CGMP warning letters. So before I get into that, I want to point out one thing. So the drug framework and the manufacturing framework around it in CGMP was literally designed to have multiple control layers in the manufacturing process. And the reason for this is that if one of these CGMP layers, so to speak, were to fail, others can catch the drug before distribution. And when I'm talking about the layers, I'm talking about raw material testing, in-process testing, finished product testing, process validation, stability, complaint review, investigations. There's various layers, and the idea is that if one were to have a problem, the others should catch drugs that are problematic before they're distributed. And because of this, the majority of our compliance actions, particularly warning letters, what we are doing is we're pointing out if there's a problem with one or more of the layers, but we do not need evidence that the drugs are actually failing when they leave a facility in order to issue a warning letter. So I want to point out that the majority of our warning letters, we don't have evidence of failing products in distribution. We're basically trying to address things before that happens. So again, as evidence of a failing product is not necessary, a warning letter does not actually mean that drugs from the facility are failing specification. And so that is one of the misperceptions that we see out there. And typically our actions are usually a warning of noncompliance, and the aim is that the firm will fix things with that particular CGMP issue before failures occur with distributed drugs. It's a preemptive strike. Not all FDA commodities operate in this fashion based on kind of how the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act is set up, but for drug CGMP, most of our actions are preemptive in nature. Now, that being said, if an inspectional finding does reveal a failing product, or if there's a high likelihood that we think that there is failing product, FDA will do things a little bit differently. First, we will probably ask the firm to recall or discuss that option with them, and or put out public notice via press release or alert, sometimes both, so that the firm can address it and that the public or purchasers are aware of the issues. So we do this when we have evidence or we think that there may be failing product. And if we need to, we can pursue more aggressive actions. And I talked about some of the things before we went over with our colleagues at DOJ, whether it's seizure, administrative detention, consent decrees, et cetera. And now I want to talk about import alerts. So import alerts are used quite a bit. As I talked about, if a finding warrants it, FDA can place foreign drug manufacturing facilities on import alert, barring their drugs from legally entering the United States. And I have a link here to FDA import alerts in general, and you can see all the different permutations of that. But there is one for drugs and GMP. Now, when we have a situation where we're considering an import alert, we also want to keep in mind of how this may affect the supply chain and availability of critical drugs. And so we consult with our colleagues in the drug shortage staff to determine if placing a firm on import alert could lead to a shortage. If that is the case, we do have the capability of excluding specific drugs from the import alert. Now, if we do this, it's not a free pass. What we do is we will actually impose additional requirements on the manufacturer tailored to the specific technical issues for those drugs. Let's say that the CGMP issues are related to elevated levels of impurities. We may place the drug on carve-out when we put the facility on import alert, but we may require extra testing for that specific impurity. And so we will stipulate these technical issues and controls based on what the findings were. And beyond that, FDA can, and we often do, conduct our own independent testing of these imports as an additional oversight control when this occurs. Here I have a recent import alert carve-out example. If you go onto this link, you'll see a letter that we sent to a firm that we recently placed on import alert. It goes into why we placed them on import alert, but the other things that it does is it actually lists the drugs that are on carve-out, as well as those extra stipulations that we want the firm to do in order to be able to ship these drugs into the United States. And with that, I'm going to pass the torch on to Darshini, who's going to talk about what is posted and where. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Darshini Satchi, and I'm the Deputy Director in the Division of Information Disclosure Policy. I will tell you that I've been at FDA for almost 20 years, and I always learn something new when working with my colleagues. So a special thanks to all of them for their efforts on this webinar. Today, I'm going to cover what records are posted on FDA websites, where they are generally posted, and when they are posted. We all know that there's a tremendous amount of interest in compliance-related records. We receive hundreds of Freedom of Information requests every year for these kinds of records. So what do we post? Redacted CGMP inspection FDA Form 483s are generally posted only if 3 or more Freedom of Information Act requests are submitted or proactively by FDA under specific conditions. Records have to be redacted if they contain trade secret information or confidential commercial information. Examples of trade secret would be how a drug is manufactured and what specific ingredients are used. Confidential commercial information would be, for example, how many units are made at a particular facility or what vendors the facility contracted with. Warning letters and warning letter closeouts are also posted to the FDA warning letter page. My division will start working on them as soon as they are assigned to us, and we have to redact these records for trade secret and confidential commercial information. We also post CGMP import alerts, as well as the carve-out drugs as referenced by Francis earlier. And final CGMP classifications are also posted to the inspection classification database. So now let's turn our attention to when documents are posted. CGMP classifications are typically posted to the inspections dashboard within 1 week after an inspection is finalized. Warning letters are typically posted within 1 or 2 weeks of issuance. We try to get these warning letters up within a week, but sometimes it might take us a bit longer depending on the complexity of the warning letter. And there are no set time frames for posting of 483s because these were only posted if there are 3 or more FOIA requests, as I mentioned earlier. Once that third request is processed, then it's sent for posting. Now I'm going to pass this on to Rob to talk about what FDA resources are available and about the public dashboard.
Good day. Again, my name is Rob Bughman, and I'm the project manager for the FDA Data Dashboard. I'll provide some background and demonstrate the data dashboard. First, I'll provide some links and information on where you can find various CGMP inspection-related documents and data. On this slide, there's a list of links to applicable CGMP inspection-related documents and data. The first 2 links direct the user to the location where users can search and download published ORA and CDER 483s. The third link directs the user to the location where warning letter links are published and searchable. The FDA inspection dashboard is where FDA publishes releasable inspection details, and I will demonstrate that shortly. The CGMP import alert link takes the user to the import alert details page where the user can see which firms are on the CGMP import alert. The enforcement report provides a searchable data set of all classified FDA recalls and provides recall details. The recall information link allows users to search for press release information associated with FDA recalls. The FDA created the FDA Data Dashboard in response to White House transparency requirements and went live initially in December of 2017. Since that time, the FDA has constantly improved and added features. The FDA Data Dashboard is a public resource that compiles and links publicly available data sets in one location on dashboards with easy-to-use, visually accessible, customizable, and understandable graphics. Our compliance data sets are available through APIs, and the data is updated weekly. Additionally, the FDA Data Dashboard includes import entry data and several Food Safety Modernization Act dashboards, and links to import alerts and warning letters. I'll now provide a brief demonstration of the FDA Data Dashboard. This is a homepage for the FDA Data Dashboard that you can access at datadashboard.fda.gov. There are links to different compliance dashboards as well as links to FSMA data. Additionally, there are resources such as a how-to video, a glossary, a link to the API module, the ability to sign up for notifications, and a Contact Us page. For this demonstration, I will focus on the inspections dashboard and the search firm information, also known as the Firm Supplier Evaluation resource. First, I will start with the inspections dashboard. This dashboard is similar in layout and function to the other compliance dashboards. At the top of the page, we provide caveats and notes regarding the data. For the inspections dashboard, I'll point out that the data set here is not a complete representation of all FDA inspections. On the inspection dashboard, there are several charts, maps, and tables. All of these elements are linked and dynamic. If you drill into one, it will automatically update the others based on the filter you applied. In addition to the detailed information on inspections, the FDA provides citation data associated with 483s. This data is only published when all parts of the inspection are finalized, and below that we have links to the CDER and ORA reading rooms where you can find any published 483. There are multiple ways to search for information. There's a global search tool that lets you type in what you want to filter on and automatically provides suggestions. There's a flyout filter panel where you are able to select multiple filter options. Just click on the filter and select the data you want to filter on, and then click on the green check mark. Additionally, the elements of the table are filterable, so you can click on an element and click the green check mark. Finally, the raw data tables at the bottom are sortable and filterable, similar to the flyout panel. In addition to filtering and searching the data, you are able to download the datasets. The download feature allows you to download the entire dataset or the filtered dataset. Next, I'll demonstrate the firm supplier evaluation resource. This feature allows the user to search for a specific firm using the firm name or FEI and returns all available compliance data. On this page, you have the search bar and links and resources to the applicable data. To search for a firm, the user just begins typing the firm name or FEI. Once you inputted the data, the dashboard will return any firm that matches your search criteria. Then click on the FEI of interest in the results table, and the user will be directed to the firm profile page. On the firm profile page, the user will see the latest firm information, FEI, name, and address. Below that, there is a timeline of available compliance actions, then details on any inspection, compliance action, recall, import refusal, and then links to any import alert or warning letter. That completes my demonstration of the FDA data dashboard. In the next year, we hope to add direct links to published 483s on the inspections dashboard and the firm profile page. If you have any questions or comments in the future, please feel free to contact me using the Contact Us page. Thank you.
Thank you all for the great presentations. We'll now transition to our Q&A session. And as a reminder, if you haven't had a chance to enter your questions into the Q&A chat pod, please do so now. Looks like we have some questions coming in right as we speak. And the first group of questions will be directed to Dr. Francis Godwin. And here's the first question for Dr. Godwin. What are the types of FDA inspections?
Sure. Thanks for the question. When you're looking at GMP inspections for drug manufacturers, there's three general types. There's a pre-approval inspection, which is when an application is submitted to the agency, and the agency will go out to the facility to see how the facility is doing before approval. The second is surveillance inspections. These are the majority of GMP inspections, where FDA will look at the quality system, drugs being manufactured, what my colleague in ORA, Simone Pitts, talked about. And the third type is what's called a for-cause, sometimes called a directed inspection, and that's where there's information or it's a follow-up where FDA wants to go out for a specific reason, whether it be a complaint or informant, something like that, where FDA wants to cover something very specifically on inspection. And those are the three main buckets of inspection types when it comes to CGMP inspections.
Thank you for responding to that question. We do have another question for Dr. Godwin, and here is the question. Can you request an FDA inspection?
The short answer is yes. You can ask FDA to come inspect your facility, though we are not required to. And typically the only times we see requests for an FDA inspection is typically in the OAI space where a firm has been found out of compliance, and they're asking us to come back and see if they've corrected things on site before we would remove them from import alert or issue a warning letter, closeout letter. The only area where there's a formal process related to that is for generic drug warning letter follow-ups, where there's a formal request for inspection and some timelines. And that can be found if you look up the GDUFA commitment letter, there's a section that talks about inspection requests there.
Thank you for responding to that question. Moving on to our next panelist, we've got a couple of questions that came in for Simone Pitts, and here is the first question for Simone Pitts. How do you conduct inspections, and what are the main areas of focus?
Hi, thank you. We conduct inspections by looking at all areas of manufacturing that can have an impact on product quality. And with that review for things that can impact product quality, we're going to look at if there's going to be any impact to a risk to patient, whoever's going to receive those products. And we focus on the quality system. The quality system pretty much touches all of the 5 systems. So we're definitely going to review the quality system in detail because it touches all the other 5.
Thank you for responding to that question. We've got another question from Ms. Pitts, and here is the question. Is the FDA conducting paper audit prior to an on-site audit?
The quick answer to that is no. The FDA is not conducting a paper audit prior to an on-site audit.
Moving on to our next panelist. Thank you for that response. We've got a couple of questions that came in for Dr. Jennifer Maguire, and here is the first question for Dr. Maguire. How does FDA plan the inspection of the drug substance manufacturing units, and what elements do you look at as to establish risk-based criteria for inspections?
Okay, thank you for that question. So I'm going to tackle the latter part of that question first. With respect to how we prioritize inspections, we use the same site selection model if it's an API manufacturer or a finished dosage form manufacturer. Our entire inventory is prioritized by the same site selection model. And so if you're interested in understanding more about the site selection model, we actually have a publicly facing map or manual of policies and procedures, and the number for the map is 5014.1. It's called Understanding CDER's risk-based site selection model, and it talks about the factors that we use for prioritizing inspections. These risk factors are consistent with Section 510H4 of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. And so it talks about things like compliance history, the record history and nature of any recalls linked to the establishment, the inherent risk of the drug that's being manufactured at the site, I mentioned compliance history, but also how recently a site was inspected is a consideration, and whether or not the site's been covered under an MRA. So this publicly facing map goes through the criteria that we consider, and it gives you additional risk factors. So I'd recommend checking that out for a more comprehensive understanding. Thank you for that question.
Thank you for responding to that question. We do have another question for Dr. Maguire, and here is the question. Can the site score be shared?
Okay, so this is asking about the score coming out of the site selection model. Um, so yeah, thank you for that question. We use the site selection model as a tool to prioritize sites for surveillance inspection assignment. It helps us allocate resources in a risk-based manner. When we use the site selection model, the sites from our CDER site catalog are ranked relative to one another. So the actual value of the site score does not have any independent meaning. Because the prioritization of sites for inspection is a strategic risk-based process, we consider the model algorithm and the list of risk-ranked sites to be confidential. It's important, again, to emphasize that these scores are not a measure of site quality, and a higher score does not necessarily mean that there's a higher expectation that a site is going to be found non-compliant. And I think overall, some of the references that my colleague Rob went through and that we've been talking about in this presentation and the dashboard that he demoed are really a more appropriate place to get information about a site. Thank you for that question.
Thank you for responding to that question. Moving back to our one of our earlier panelists, we've got a question that came in for Simone Pitts. And here is the question. I'm curious about the first steps an organization should take when the FDA arrives unannounced. Do you have an opening meeting? Is it a straight walk to the manufacturing area when they arrive? Just how does that work out?
Well, when we first get to a firm for an inspection, usually there's going to be a brief meeting, no more than maybe 10, 15, or 20 minutes. We don't really want to have a long, drawn out dog and pony show. We're going to have a quick meeting, tell you about why we're there, and then we're going to quickly move and get into the manufacturing operations and start our inspections. So yeah, there should be a quick meeting, quick introductory meeting to get things started, and then we're going to start reviewing information and going out to the manufacturing areas.
Thank you for responding to that question. Moving on to our next panelist, we've got another question that came in for Dr. Francis Godwin. And here's the question. How often does a negative inspection outcome occur, and how often do we end up with a product recall?
Thanks for the question. So when you look at the statistics, about between 5 and 10% of all CGMP inspections end up with an OAI classification where they're considered out of compliance. That doesn't mean, it doesn't mean that the drugs from there are failing. In fact, the majority of those, we aren't actually seeing product failures in distribution. And so the regulatory actions we take are kind of preemptive strikes to avoid failed products in distribution going forward into the future. And so even of the 5 to 10% of all the inspections that have OAI outcomes, occasionally we do see issues with products where we have a concern. Maybe that's about 5 to 10% of those. So you're talking about a very small number of inspections will lead to things where FDA will discuss having the firm conduct a recall or putting out public statements, warning the public about a quality concern with the drug. So yeah, it's a very small percentage of the overall inspections.
Thank you for responding to that question. Moving on to our next panelist, we've got another question came in for Simone Pitts. And here is the question. How is the 483 different than an OAI classification of an inspection? And do all OAI inspections lead to issuance of 483s?
Let me flip that around a little bit. Um, if a 483 is issued, and it can depend on the classification. Say, for example, if no 483 is issued, then it's classified as NAI, no action indicated. If there is a 483 issued, it can either be correction indicated, depending on the significance of the 483 observations, and if it is OAI, official action indicated, then there means that there are some significant egregious observations that have been uncovered that can lead and have an impact on product quality, and they can have an impact on patient safety. So just to switch that around a little bit, an OAI doesn't lead to an issuance of a 483. Let's flip it. It's the 483 that can lead to the classification of OAI, which is official action indicated. Thanks for the question.
Thank you for responding. Moving back to Dr. Francis, we've got a group of questions that just came in for Dr. Francis, and here's the first question. Is it possible to have a 43 without an OAI record? And if yes, what is the inspection classification for it?
Good question. So when you're looking at a 483, those are observations that are issued at the close of the inspection, and that takes place before an inspection is classified. An inspection review that the agency conducts will, look at the content of a 43, the inspection report, the evidence, and the firm's response. And in fact, most inspections where a 43 is issued are classified as voluntary action indicated or VAI, or we consider them to be acceptable for CGMP. And on the database, they will be reflected as VAI, which indicates that a 43 was issued, but FDA found the response to be adequate and acceptable.
Thank you, Dr. Godwin, for responding to that question. We've got a few more questions for you, as we indicated earlier. And here's the next question. Who reviews companies' 15-day response to 43 observations?
Sure. So when a firm responds to a 43 response, they'll send it into the point of contact on the 43. Who reviews it will be dependent on the subject matter of that. If we're talking about a CGMP inspection, it may include the investigators that were at the facilities, but will probably also include compliance officers whose job is to review the content of 43 responses and inspections. That's what they do all day, every day. But one of the things that they also do is they will send consults out to subject matter experts related to the topic. So if there's a very specific technical topic, the compliance officer may consult with those relevant experts at the agency to make sure that the review is in line with policy guidance or other legal or technical standards. So it's centralized on a compliance officer, but we do incorporate reviews from technical experts throughout the FDA.
Thank you for responding to that question. We've got a few more questions for Dr. Godwin. And here's the next question. What is the FDA timeline to respond to the inspection response?
Sure. So starting with the concept of operations, this was started in, I think, October 2017. FDA committed to reviewing the substance of inspectional findings and the responses within 90 days of the close of an inspection. So basically, within 90 days of the end of an inspection, FDA is aiming to complete our review, and we would send a letter to the facility saying what that classification is, whether it's NAI, VAI, or OAI, and then that classification would then also get posted to the dashboard. And with the NAI and VAI classifications, those classification letters that go to the firm also contain an EI, a copy of the inspection report for the facility for their records as well.
Thank you for responding to that question, Dr. Gunn. Just got a few more for you. And here's the next question. The verbal observations discussed during the closing meeting need to be responded to in writing to the FDA? Is that
Sure. So there may be observations that are what are called verbal observations, where the investigator will talk about them at the close of the inspection, and they may not be included on the 483. All responses to 483s and verbals are all voluntary, so there's no requirement to respond. We have seen some firms respond to verbal observations, others don't. There's not a requirement there. We do see the verbal observations when we're reviewing the inspection report, and if there's something of note, we may look into it further. But there's not a it would be considered a best practice to respond to a verbal observation, particularly if the firm's told the investigator, yes, we'll conduct this CAPA or this corrective action by such and such a date, just to confirm that in the 43 response, but it's not required.
Thank you for responding to that question. Just got a couple more questions in this round, Dr. Godwin, and here's the next question. Is there a new process where FDA inspectors can send letters directly to the center and provide acceptance of the response submitted?
So there's not a new process regarding how inspections are classified. When FDA reviews an inspection outcome, the investigator may be part of that review, where they're providing feedback to whether it's their director or whether it's to compliance officers. Oftentimes we do talk to the investigators about the content, but they do provide an initial recommendation in the establishment inspection report, as well as a few other things, and then that's factored into the EIR and response review.
Thank you for responding to that question. One last question for Dr. Godwin is the following. Can FDA share more information regarding if and when a firm submits a CAP and additional inspection information such as did the company reply in a timely manner? Is there a follow-up inspection required, or are the issues critical?
Sure. So the majority of firms respond to 483s. In fact, it's usually almost outliers, where it rarely happens where a firm does not respond to a 483 within 15 business days. And when we classify a facility as VAI, if a firm has responded to a 43, it has been reviewed. If a firm doesn't respond to a 43, we have to kind of assume that maybe the corrective actions weren't put in place, and that changes things. In terms of whether a follow-up inspection is required, if we do classify a facility as official action indicated, there will be further regulatory action, and FDA would be conducting a follow-up inspection after that regulatory action, et cetera. And so I think when you're looking at the dashboard, which is probably the best place to look, if you see that a facility is classified as OAI, it means that FDA has concerns about the CGMP compliance in the facility, and there will be further activity in that space. Where typically if something is NAI or VAI, we are not, compliance is not spooling up a follow-up inspection, and it's generally going back to the surveillance model and the surveillance key.
Thank you, Dr. Godwin, for responding to that group of questions. Moving on to our next panelist, we do have a question that came in for Rob Bughman. And here is the question for Mr. Bughman. Can you tell us a little bit more about citations?
Might be multiple citations for each CFR. So the citation, the long and short descriptions provide a description of what exactly the CFR and the 483 observation is referencing to, whether it's a specific act or law. So yeah, to reiterate, the citations describe the CFR identified in the 483 inspection.
Thank you for responding to that question. Mr. Buffman, we missed the first part of that. If you don't mind, we'll just give you an opportunity just to review the first part of what you stated, and then we'll go on to our next panelist.
Okay, sorry, apologize for that. So the citations relate directly to the Code of Federal Regulation CFR reference identified in the 483, and there might be multiple citations for each CFR reference. So the short and long description identify the exact part of that CFR that is identified in the.
Excellent. Thank you for that quick review. We're going to bring Dr. Godwin back in. We got a few more questions that just rolled in for Dr. Godwin. And here is the first question. Can you share the details about warning letters?
Sure. So all of the CGMP warning letters that we issue to the drug manufacturing inventory related to inspections or sampling or records requests, all of those warning letters are posted to the FDA website. In fact, if you look on the screen, you'll see a link to the FDA warning letter page. All FDA warning letters are posted there and they're searchable. So you can search on various topics, et cetera. So all of the warning letters are out there for the public's consumption.
Thank you, Dr. Godwin, for responding to that question. We do have one more for you. It just came in. Does FDA do any virtual inspections? And if they do, in what countries do they do them?
So just to point out a clarification. So I know the question asked about virtual inspections. So FDA's definition of inspections talks about physical entry. So we consider inspections to be ones that include an on-site visit by an investigator. So we don't really do virtual inspections. At the same time, though, we do remote regulatory assessments. Sometimes these are records requests. Sometimes these are remote interactive evaluations. Both of those terms, if you go onto Google and search, FDA remote regulatory assessment or remote interactive evaluation, there are guidances on those topics that talk about the when and the how, and the various things can come from them. So I definitely recommend looking at those two guidances.
Thank you for responding to that question. We've got another question that came in for Rob Buffman. And here is the question. How do we obtain information on the RRAs or inspections performed under a mutual recognition agreement, as they do not appear to be available through FOIA?
Yes. Thank you for that question. So for the MRA, the mutual recognized agreements, those are available on the dashboard. There's an additional details filter on the inspections dashboard that you can filter by. That includes a filter for MRA inspections. As far as RRAs, those are not on the dashboard, but the information is available through FOIA. So a FOIA request can be made for RRA information.
Thank you for responding to that question. We've got a few more questions that came in for Dr. Francis Godwin. And here's the next question. Are CGMP inspections required for sites manufacturing API intermediates and not finished API?
Good question. So when you're talking about general surveillance inspections, typically those inspections will include finished dosage form manufacturers, your sterile injectables, your pill manufacturers. They'll also include your active pharmaceutical ingredient manufacturers. And they also may include their contractors such as labs, sterilizers, et cetera. When it comes to API intermediates, that is somewhat dependent on if it's a critical intermediate or if it's very early stage. But normally intermediates are not subject to routine surveillance inspections. That being said, the surveillance program is not equivalent to like all of the facilities that we can inspect. So, for instance, if we wanted to go into an API intermediate or a starting material facility, those are drugs as well. So we do have jurisdiction and we can inspect those facilities, typically under a for-cause situation. Same thing with excipient manufacturers. They aren't subject to routine surveillance inspection, but if we had a reason to, we can conduct for-cause inspections and go into those facilities as well. Yeah, thanks for that question.
Thank you for responding, Dr. Francis Godwin. And we have one more for you in this round. Are inspections usually performed when a facility or site is closing?
And the answer to that one is it will depend on the circumstances. If a facility is closing, but they still have drugs that they want to distribute, or there's other things going on, we may ask that the investigators go out and look into a few things regarding where the drugs are going, or kind of the plan to get from operation to closing, et cetera. There are certain GMPs that deal with some things like stability, where well after a drug is distributed, there are still CGMP requirements on it. Another times, we may not conduct an inspection, but we may verify if a site is closed. That may not be a full inspection. That may be what's called an investigation, where we would ask someone to go out there and just verify that the site is closed as part of inventory management. So it depends. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Godwin. And we did have one other question just came in with your name on it. So here's the question. Are CGMP data reviewers allowed to have modified permissions on laboratory systems? If not, why not?
Sure. So the question is really asking about who has access to modify permissions or modify data in CGMP settings. And FDA has a guidance that touches on this subject. It's about data integrity in CGMP. And in that guidance, we talk about that the capabilities of various folks in technical systems should be limited for allowing modification. You don't want an analyst being able to modify records after the fact, and you definitely want to make sure that there's audit trails in place. So if there were any modifications, they would be known, they would be tracked, and there would be reasons for it. So I would definitely recommend reviewing that guidance. It goes into levels of access and when you can, how you store data, and whether or not you can modify values, but if you modify them, how they need to be recorded and tracked under CGMP.
Thank you, Dr. Godwin, for answering that question. Moving on to our next panelist, we do have a few questions that came in for Dr. Jennifer Maguire. And here's the first question for Dr. Maguire. Is it still the case that PET, IND, RD, RC manufacturers who only manufacture PET drugs for research are not required to register?
That's a good question. Thanks. So only sites that are engaged in commercial manufacturing are required to register and or list. So if your site is engaged in any research and development type activities, you're not obligated to register and list. So it looks like in this question, it's asking about a PET manufacturer who's only engaging in research activities, and therefore they would not be required to register. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. We've got another question for Dr. Maguire. Does Europe contain the UK as well on slide 10?
Also a good question. So the data that I showed on my earlier slides are actually for the geographic region or continent of Europe. So if it says Europe, it's all the countries engaged in manufacturing located in Europe. So from that perspective, yes, the UK would be included in that data under Europe. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Maguire. We do have a few more questions for you, and here is the next question. How long after the previous inspection would another one be due?
Yeah, so thank you for that question. So we do not have a fixed interval between any of our surveillance inspections anymore with the revisions to FDASIA in 2012. we schedule purely based on risk. So, sites that manufacture drugs that are more complex to manufacture or have higher inherent product risk, or sites with poorer compliance histories might be inspected more frequently than other sites, but it's all based on risk and the site selection model, and there is no fixed interval that you can anticipate. Thank you for that question.
Thank you for responding. We do have a few more questions, and here's the next question for Dr. Maguire. Is a list available of the countries that FDA has a mutual agreement established? And if so, where can this list be found?
Yes, there is a list available. I'm going to ask our producer if he could drop the web address for our attendees. But as of right now, we have mutual agreements in place with the UK, with the EU, and with Switzerland. And the website will direct you to more information about MRA. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. We've got a few more questions for Dr. Maguire, and here's the next question. Is there any difference between a DI inspection and surveillance inspections?
Yeah, so thank you for that question. All inspections, whether they're pre-approval, post-approval, surveillance inspection, for-cause inspection, any inspection covers data integrity. So, data integrity is an integral part of any inspection that US FDA conducts. So, from that angle, there's really nothing that's a DI inspection. That's an element covered always. Thank you for that question.
Thank you for responding. We've got a few more questions, and here's another question for Dr. Maguire. Please clarify that facilities which manufacture phase 1 drugs and are exempt from CFR 210 are not required to register with FDA, and whether they are subject to an inspection.
Okay, so thank you for that question. I'm gonna piece it apart into two aspects. So, sites that are manufacturing investigational drugs that are not being entered into commercial distribution are not required to register and list, because registration and listing is for sites engaged in commercial manufacture. With that being said, we do have the authority, if and when the need arises, to inspect a site that's making investigational drugs. Thank you for that question.
Thank you for responding. We have one more question for Dr. Maguire in this round, and here's the question. What is the objective of making the mutually recognition agreement, and does FDA consider or accept the inspection report given by EU member states and or by the UK?
Okay, thank you for that question. So under the MRA, we do request inspection reports from the authorities that we have deemed competent. And as I mentioned before, that's UK, EU, and Switzerland. And we perform our own review and classification. And the results of the classification are available on the inspections webpage in the database. They'll show up as our own inspection. The other part of the question is asking why. Um, why do we engage in MRAs? And so, the reason that we engage in MRAs is because it yields greater efficiencies for the US and for our foreign regulatory systems by avoiding duplication of inspections. And it also allows us to enable reallocation of resources towards inspection of drug manufacturing facilities with potentially higher public health risks across the globe. So thank you for that question.
Thank you for responding to that group of questions. We've got a few more questions that came in for Simone Pitts. And here is the first question for Ms. Pitts. Does FDA publish EIRs for the public to review?
The 43 the EIRs are published not for the public to review. They can be found on the dashboard, but an EIR is given to the company. A redacted version is given to the company.
Thank you for responding to that question. We've got another question for Ms. Pitts. And here's the question. Does FDA offer recommendations other than any GMP deficiencies in the 483 or the EIR?
No, the FDA, specifically the investigator conducting the inspection, does not offer any recommendations other than what has been listed on the FDA 483. Excuse me. That is not something that they do. It's only factual events that are listed. There are no recommendations that are offered from the investigator during that time. And in the EIR, there is nothing that's offered in terms of a recommendation either. Perhaps when you get the compliance level, when you're looking at, say, for example, a warning letter, the recommendation from compliance could be that we suggest that that compliance suggests that you may seek the advice of a consultant or something like that, but never at the investigator level when a 43 is issued or when the EIR is written and submitted for review and approval.
Thank you for responding to those questions. Moving on to our next panelist, we've got another question that came in for Dr. Jennifer Maguire. And here's the question. Would you please be able to share your understanding about the expectations of quality management maturity program integration verification during on-site inspections?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I'm going to ask our producer if they can also drop a link here that will guide you to the webpage that we have on quality management maturity. We recently published a white paper called CDER's Quality Management Maturity Program, Practice Areas and Prototype Assessment Protocol Development. So this paper guides you through the assessment approach that we plan to use at establishments that participate in the QMM program. And it describes the different practice areas that we plan to cover with our assessment protocol. So keep in mind that this program is voluntary and it is completely separate from ORA and the field and CGMP inspections. So we're not looking to add on to what you know as current surveillance inspections or pre-approval inspections and start covering quality management maturity. We're actually establishing a completely different program that will be assessing quality management maturity for those participants that wish to engage in the program. So I think the webpage we have and the white paper is a great tool to get a better sense of what the quality management maturity program is, what the goals of the program are, where we are in program development. We're very early. Right now we're working on, as I mentioned, developing the prototype assessment protocol. So still, working towards completing that this year. And then the white paper will also delve into some of the misconceptions about the program. So to help explain, that quality management maturity assessments, they're not CGMP assessments. We're not assessing product quality. Quality management maturity is not the same as quality metrics. So there's a lot of rich information in the white paper that I think will be really helpful for anybody who'd like to understand that program better. So thank you so much for that question.
Thank you for responding. We have a few more questions that came in for Dr. Francis Godwin. And here is the first question referencing slide number 21 that said 21 part 210 to 11 are the minimum standards that are acceptable for finished drug products. Does this apply to pet drug manufacturers, or are they inspected against 21 CFR Part 212?
Sure. Thanks for the question. So the majority of finished dosage forms, pills, capsules, vials, those are held to 210 and 211. The questioner is correct. Pet drugs or positron emission topography drugs are held to the GMPs under Section 212. And just to point out a few other things, the other drugs are held to GMPs, but maybe held to different standards than 210 or 211. For instance, active pharmaceutical ingredients are not covered under regulation, but FDA has a guidance specific to their manufacturer that talks about how we interpret the statute. So, yeah, but most of the finished dosage form drugs other than PET are under the 210 and 211s.
Thank you for responding to that question. We've got a few more questions for Dr. Godwin, and here's the next question. How long should a firm wait for an EIR? And if an EIR is not received within that time frame, what office should be contacted to request a copy of the EIR, and what information should be given to facilitate a successful request?
Sure. So, under the concept of operations, which is on FDA's website, we talk about the agency's goal to classify all inspections within 90 days. If a facility is classified as acceptable, an NAI or VAI classification, FDA will send a letter to the firm, and it will include a redacted copy of the EIR. So, if your facility, I would expect to wait 90 days. Those are calendar days, so 3 months from the close of the inspection. If you haven't received it by then and you want to know what's going on, the best thing to do is to send in an email to the point of contact, either on the 483 if one was issued, or if there was no 483, there's usually a point of contact with the investigator, the 42, just to ask for a status update, and that will find its way to the right folks. So that's what I'd recommend.
Thank you for responding to that question. We've got another question regarding 483. Can you go into more detail with examples about what would trigger an OAI without a 483? Thanks.
Good question. So these are quite rare. Typically, when an inspection ends and there's no 43 issued, the facility tends to be classified as NAI or acceptable. But there are rare circumstances where an OAI classification would result. This typically happens when there's things that are occurring beyond just the inspection and the observations, particularly if samples were collected during the inspection. Take for example, there's an inspection is covering the quality unit, a few things. Samples are collected and sent to FDA labs. The FDA labs find gross contamination. We start digging into it. We look at some of the documents and collect, and we find, violations. Even if there was not a 43 issued, a facility could be classified as OAI. It doesn't happen very often. To ballpark it, I'd say maybe once a year. So they're fairly unique situations, but they do occur. But usually it's because there's something else going on that's also impacting the inspectional review.
Thank you for responding to that question. We've got a few more questions for Dr. Godwin. And here's the next question. Can the classification of the 483 be done sooner than 90 days when the inspection was scheduled by FDA close to the PDUFA date?
Sure. So we do aim to classify all the inspections within 90 days. Sometimes the inspection surveillance schedules particular, they're on a different time clock than applications. If there is an inspection that has the potential to affect a pending application, we do have a pathway for our colleagues in the review and pre-approval groups to let us know. And then if it meets certain criteria, we can accelerate the classification, though it's typically reserved for very high drugs that are really needed for unmet patient needs.
Thank you for responding to that question. Got another question for Dr. Godwin regarding a follow-up inspection, and here's the question. In the follow-up inspection, is the scope only on the original 483 to consider foreclosure? If other observations are made outside of the scope of the original 483, will that keep the original EIR open, or will that be closed and a new 483 be issued?
Sure. So I'll walk through an example to help answer the question. Let's say that there's an FDA inspection, a 483 is issued, the firm responds, but their response is lacking. They're classified as OAI and they're issued a warning letter. After we reviewed the content of the warning letter response and a few other things, we will request our colleagues in the Office of Regulatory Affairs to go back out and conduct a follow-up inspection. That follow-up inspection typically will cover not only the corrective actions from the warning letter, but it may also look at the previous 43 response, the previous 483 items, but it can also look at anything else. So it may not be limited to just what the discussions in the warning letter or a previous 483 were about. It will look at other areas of compliance. In fact, quite a few times we may find that a firm has corrected specific things related to what was in the warning letter, but they haven't been looking at other areas where they need to be compliant. So a lot of times our regulatory actions talk about that, they're not an all-inclusive list and that the firms are responsible for ensuring complete compliance with all aspects of CGMP. So to shorten the answer, a follow-up inspection will typically cover previous issues, but we'll also see if there's other issues that have yet to be uncovered.
Thank you for responding to that question. We've got another question regarding for Dr. Godwin regarding differences between a consent decree and untitled letters. What is the basic difference?
Sure. So they're quite different, the two of them. So our typical default regulatory action for OAI is a warning letter that details in writing the problems that we've uncovered during inspection or elsewhere, and asking for corrective actions from the firm. They're rare. I mean, untitled letters are maybe issued maybe 1, 2, at most 3 a year. And the regulatory procedures manual that FDA has online talks about some of the criteria for untitled letters, but they may be for issues where there's a jurisdictional thing where we might not have interstate commerce yet, or there's a technical wrinkle. But they're typically very rare. A consent decree, on the other hand, is the opposite end, and that is typically where the violations have been seen are egregious, that we've asked the Department of Justice and the judicial system to get involved. And a consent decree, typically it's a consent decree of injunction, is basically an agreement between FDA, the firm, and it's overseen by the judicial system or a court, and it will contain various stipulations. Consent decrees are relatively rare in the pharmaceutical space, but they're typically occur when there's repeat violations that are egregious, and we need the courts to step in to get compliance back in action.
Thank you for responding to that question. We do have a few questions coming in right now, and it looks like the next question is referring to Simone Pitts. And here is the next question for Ms. Pitts. Were you able to please kindly explain the correlation between the 483 and Form 484?
Okay, thank you for the question. The Form 484, that is a receipt for samples, and that is what the investigator will issue when they collect any particular sample from the firm. That's what they use that for. The 484 is going to be used for just samples. It's not going to be used for any promotional items or anything like that, or any labels or any photographs or anything like that. It's just for physical samples that are taken by the investigator from the firm. Whereas the 483 documents the observations that the investigator has uncovered during their inspection. After evidence review, after document collection, after they've seen something that is in violation of 21 CFR Part the 211s, the basic minimum requirements for GMPs. And if they find something that rises to that level, they would put those observations on an FDA 483. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. We've got another question that came in for Simone Pitts. And here's the question. Does the FDA inspector actually take the copies of the documents away with them after the inspection?
Yes. Yes, we do take physical documents with us, either in hard copy form or we can take them electronically. But yes, we do take our documents. We do review them again when we're reviewing and writing our EIR, our Establishment Inspection Report. And they are also included, if you look at the back of an EIR, the exhibits that are collected, those are the documents that we have taken from a firm and have utilized them to support whatever is written within the body of the EIR.
Thank you for responding to that question. We've got one more just came in for Simone Pitts, and here is the question. And it's regarding FDA site inspections and covering SUPAC reports. Can you explain this, please?
For SUPAC reports, for those of you who may not be familiar with that, the SUPAC is scale up and post approval changes that are occurred during a firm. There is a guidance document out there, and there is I do believe, a Q&A for a SUPAC guidance, questions and answers. But yes, we do, as part of the evidence collection and document review, we do look at if there's been any changes, whether it be scale up, changes in equipment, or changes in suppliers, vendors, anything like that that has been observed during the inspection. We will cover that as part of the inspection. For SUPAC, it's mostly along the lines of pre-approval and post-approval inspections, but we do look at the SUPAC guidelines when we're conducting our inspections.
Thank you for responding to that question. We've got a few more questions that came in for Dr. Francis Godwin. And here's the first question. Does FDA issue GMP compliance certificates or only certificates of pharmaceutical products?
So FDA does not issue GMP compliance certificates, and I know the EU does. So the way that FDA does it is that when we review an inspection, we will classify it, and that classification we talked about earlier about acceptable as NAI and VAI and unacceptable OAI, that's transmitted to the firm in paper or electronically in email these days, but it's also posted on the web in the dashboard. And so that's where the dashboard is key, because anyone can see the most recent classification of a facility and if FDA considers it acceptable for CGMP or not. So short answer, we don't issue those certificates, but we do post the classifications so that anyone can see how FDA views a facility.
Thank you for responding to that question. We've got another question that came in for Dr. Godwin. And here's the question. Are observations or findings held to different critically depending on the country of origin of the manufacturing site when determining the final inspection classification outcome?
Sure, so good question. So we do not factor in geography or country when doing CGMP classifications. It doesn't matter if something is made in the US, Europe, Africa, Asia. You know, the CGMP legal and technical standards are the same regardless of of geography, so we don't factor that in. That being said, there may be some instances where FDA is aware of geographical concerns where we may be more aggressive in terms of supply chain interaction. For instance, during the pandemic, we knew that there was methanol substitution for ethanol in hand sanitizers, and that was a geographic concern. So we actually placed the entire country on import alert for hand sanitizer production, and that was a GMP issue. Recently, we have seen diethylene glycol substitution for propylene glycol, which is a commonly used excipient. We've seen multiple instances of that in India and Indonesia. So if we're encountering a CGMP violation regarding, say, methanol or DEG, and we know that the country or the region has that going on, we may be more aggressive in terms of placing a firm under import alert or other things like that from a patient safety perspective.
Thank you for responding to those questions. We've got a few questions, a couple of questions that came in on Rob Bughman. And here is the first question. Why are all inspection details not posted for every inspection, especially those companies that were issued a warning letter?
Yes, thank you for that question. So first, I'll start by saying that, or emphasizing that only finalized inspections are published on the dashboard by project area. So once all parts of one project area are finalized, you will see that on the dashboard. One of the main reasons, especially with warning letters, is there might be compliance actions that the FDA is still working through, and so that might not be. So the inspection won't be finalized until all the compliance actions are completed. Additionally, certain centers have determined that certain inspection processes, primarily pre-approval inspections, won't be published on the dashboard. So those ones, you won't see any details on pre-approval inspections on the dashboard. But finally, like if that doesn't relate to your firm, or if you think the firm is missing an inspection, the best recourse is to contact the investigator, and they should be able to help them to complete and finalize the inspection and get it published on the dashboard. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. We've got another question that came in from Mr. Bughman, and here's the question. The dashboard is often missing 483 observations, no data found for the selected firm. Where can we find the 483 observations?
So for this question, thank you. I'll start by emphasizing that the 483 is available in the reading rooms. The FOIA process is a different process than what we display on the dashboard. So there will be instances where the 483s will be available in the reading room, but not on the dashboard. Well, in the same time, there are many more citations related to 483s that haven't went through the FOIA process yet that are available on the dashboard. Additionally, 483 information is only published once all parts of an inspection are finalized. So again, if there's issues with the firm not seeing it, they can contact their investigator. And then again, it also relates to the we only publish the 483 information for the project areas that are allowed to be published on the dashboard. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that group of questions. Moving on to our next panelist, we do have another question that came in for Dr. Jennifer Maguire. And here's the question for Dr. Maguire. For a new site in the EU that has never manufactured drugs, will the FDA rely on the MRA, or will the inspection for the site be in person?
Thanks. That's a great question. We will rely on the MRA if the site is in a country that we have an MRA agreement in place with. We will take advantage of the MRA. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. We have a question that came in for Darshini Satchi. And here is the question for Darshini Satchi. Will the sponsor be notified if a 483 is going to be posted due to 3+ FOIA requests?
That's a great question. Thank you. No, there is no notification to the sponsor. We're not required to do any sort of pre-disclosure notification. Once we have reviewed that third FOIA request, we will then send it for posting, and it's available to the public at that time.
Darshini Satchi, we cannot hear you if you are speaking. What we're going to do is move on to our next panelist and then check back in with you in a moment after our tech team reaches out to you. Moving back to Dr. Jennifer Maguire, we do have another question that came in. All right. Well, we've got another question. We had a little bit of technical issue there, but we'll try to get another question in. And this is for Dr. Jennifer Maguire. Is a records request or records inspection considered an official inspection?
Yeah, thanks for that. That's a great question. So, as Francis mentioned earlier, our definition of inspection requires physical entry. So, when we talk about inspection, we're talking about boots on the ground, somebody physically coming to your site and inspecting your operations. With that being said, we have authority under 704A4 to request records in advance or in lieu of inspection. And although a records request does not satisfy our obligation to inspect, it is still a non-voluntary records request, meaning that if we send you a 704A4 request, you are obligated to respond. Thank you for the opportunity to answer that question.
Thank you for responding to that question. We do have another question for Dr. Maguire. What determines the frequency of an FDA inspection?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So we are mandated to follow the risk factors. So in 2012, FDASIA modified the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act to introduce language that says that what you know as surveillance inspection should be scheduled on a risk-based frequency. And there are a number of factors that we are required to consider when doing that. And so the frequency of your inspections is driven by the risk factors that we are mandated to consider. And we do that through the site selection model, which prioritizes inspections for assignment based on the risk factors. Thank you for that question.
Thank you for responding, Dr. Maguire. We've got another question that just came in for Simone Pitts. And here is the question. What are some tips that you can share with us on how to prepare for an inspection?
Hi, I guess that's the $1 million question, right? How to prepare for an FDA inspection. So just kind of quickly, some things that we are going to look at is if, excuse me, is that if is your equipment qualified before it's being used? Are your vendors or suppliers that you're using to either bring in raw materials for you or do any testing for you outside? Are they qualified and are they suitable for their intended use? The methods that are being used analytically, are those methods validated and are they suitable for their intended use? If you're using a compendial method, have you determined that it is comparable, or suitable equivalent or better than the USP, and have you documented that somewhere in a report or something? Do you have that documented? In terms of how do you prepare for the inspection, another little tidbit could be have the right people in place when questions are being asked at the firm. A lot of times, say for example, management would like to answer a question when the question is being asked of an operator or an analyst. So we want you to have the right people in place to answer those questions. And those are some of the little tidbits I can just give you off the top of my head right now. So that's a great question.
Thank you for responding to that question. We only have just a little over a minute left. We got another question that just came in for Dr. Francis Godwin, and we're going to try to get this one in. And here is the question. If a manufacturer is under a warning letter, can an NDA approval move forward?
Short answer is no. If a facility is OAI, that status would typically preclude FDA from approving a new drug application, a generic application, or a biologic application.
Thank you for responding to that question, and thanks all of our panelists and presenters for responding to questions. And the numerous questions that came in today, we certainly appreciate them taking an opportunity to go into depth in each one.